Joining us on the line to discuss is Harmeet Dhillon. She, of course, is the managing partner of Dhillon Law Group, and she's done work with the Trump campaign, particularly with regard to election law. Harmeet, obviously, this is an extraordinarily dark day in the history of the American Republic, unprecedented for a local prosecutor in Manhattan to pick up what really is a felony federal charge that was never tried, try to spin it into a state law charge it 34 times, and then receive a conviction. What do you make of the trial? And then we'll get to what comes next.
Well, Ben, I'm almost at a loss for words. This is an unprecedented day, as you've said, not just for our country, but for our legal system. And what we saw in this case, this is the first time ever in New York State that falsification of records has been charged as a felony. The statute of limitations has run. The federal prosecutors, these state prosecutors previously, the FEC, every agency that could have charged these crimes rejected them as not being crimes. And so this is a Frankenstein case put together and life breathed into it by a judge who rigged it. I'm not surprised when I heard that the jury came back with a verdict. I knew what the verdict was going to be, because the best case scenario here would have been that one honest juror would have looked at this steaming pile of dung and said, no, I cannot participate in this farce. But the way the judge put blinders on the jury, the way the judge gave grossly improper jury instructions, the way the judge refused to recuse himself, allowed prejudicial evidence to be had, and generally rigged this from day one. This was a foregone conclusion almost. And so, what we have to do here is pray that the appeals process goes forward. However, I do think that from a political standpoint, Ben, this has backfired bigly, as President Trump would say. He is now more popular than he was at the beginning of this prosecution. And I hope that the American people see this for what it is. And we cannot let this stand in our country. It reminds me of Pakistan. It reminds me of the Middle East. It reminds me of places where they don't have the rule of law. And this is really a dangerous day for our country.
Now, Harmeet, this is obviously a kangaroo court situation. We've all spent a lot of time following this trial. The truth is that I personally didn't spend a lot of time on it, because it was pretty clear as soon as they brought charges, no matter what it was, that Trump was going to get convicted. I mean, this was simply picking a jurisdiction where people hate Donald Trump, bringing him up on literally anything, manufacturing some charge or another to spin it into a felony, and then charging him with it. And that was pretty clear from Judge Merchan's jury instructions, which, when you go through in detail, I've never seen anything remotely like this. I mean, you had a situation in which you had a misdemeanor that had run the statute of limitations with regard to falsification of business records. That was kept alive by spinning the idea that that was a falsification on behalf of a second unspecified crime. There were three theories that were put forward as to what that second unspecified crime was. And Judge Merchan then informed the jury they didn't even have to agree on what the underlying crime was that the falsification of business records was supposed to be hiding, that they could actually divide 4, 4, and 4 on those various crimes. What I compared that to is that's sort of like saying that in a felony murder case where the murder is imputed to a person who didn't commit the murder based on the underlying felony that everybody was committing together, like robbing a bank, that there are actually like 5 felonies that are charged. You don't have to agree. The jurors don't have to agree on what the felony was. It could be like one of 5 different felonies, and they could vehemently disagree, but you could still charge somebody with felony murder. I've never heard of unanimity by aggregation. That seemed like a weird concept to me.
It's nonsense. That's why you never heard of it. Judges are ashamed to let such a thing pass, and prosecutors are ashamed to propose it. I've never seen it proposed even in a case. And there's United States Supreme Court precedent that says that where there's a crime that requires a predicate act, the jury has to agree unanimously on what the predicate act is. And in this case, there is no case, period, if there isn't a single felony that the jury agrees on unanimously. Now, what's also clear in this case, Ben, I mean, you know from being a lawyer yourself, that judges are normally embarrassed to be reversed. That's one sort of social check that keeps them in place. They're embarrassed that they might have a record that looks bad on appeal. But in this case, the judge, I think, is fully aware that he's committed numerous acts of reversible error, and he doesn't care. I think the end game for this judge is a lucrative book deal, TV slot with CNN, MSNBC. His daughter continues to get big multi-million-dollar payouts from her company. And it's just upside for a political hack of a judge. And so, that's the problem, is that the normal brakes and social barriers that apply and speed bumps that apply in our country have been degraded over the last few years in this Get Trump effort. So, I've been a lawyer for 31 years, and I really question, when you go into a court and you try to explain to a client how it's going to go, can you predict that anymore? Because this is not a predictable outcome of a just legal system.
So, Harmeet, I think the big question on everybody's mind now is whether he's going to actually be sentenced by Judge Merchan to jail time. I would be shocked if he is not, considering the way that this trial has proceeded, considering what a mess the charges were in the first place. It is obvious to me that if Merchan stops short of sending him to jail, he wouldn't be going all the way. If he wants that lucrative book contract, he has to be the guy who sent Donald Trump to jail. How do you think the sentencing goes, particularly because one aspect of the sentencing is that supposedly you get an easier sentence if you show remorse. Trump literally cannot show remorse for a crime he did not commit because there's no crime alleged. So how do you think that sentencing goes?
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think the judge's charter politically was throw the book at this guy, tie him up, embarrass him, humiliate him. And by the way, hold this sentencing, despite other cases that he's got going on, 1 week before the Republican National Convention to try to smear that as well. And so the talking points from the Democrats, as they're going to be churning out in minutes, will be the Republicans are nominating a convicted felon, save our country, vote for Joe Biden, who himself is, of course, in my opinion, guilty of many crimes that his DOJ will never charge him or his son even for. They're slapping them on the wrist with minor things with the son. So, we have to hope that the American voting public, first of all, will get out and vote and be outraged by this and be motivated. As you pointed out in your intro, it's really not going to change. If anything, it's going to strengthen the resolve of the MAGA voters. But I think there are actually a lot more voters out there who are disgusted. I've seen a lot of never Trumper people I know in my social circles who say they're going to vote for President Trump as a result of this. And so I think it may backfire, but then you have to look at whether we have a fair election or not. I don't think we had a fair election in 2020. And so, the rigging is going pretty deep here in our country. I'm sorry to say that as an American, but I think I have very serious concerns about the justice system at this point. And by the way, these judges at the state level are also the ones who determine elections. And so if it happened in New York and Manhattan, that they're able to get to judges in other places as well.
So, Harmeet, what is the process for Trump's legal team now? So presumably there will be state appeals. If this isn't reversible error, I don't know what is. There could be theoretical federal appeals based presumably on the idea that they charged a federal crime in a state court, which you're not supposed to do. I mean, that's effectively what they convicted him based upon. How do you see the appellate process playing out? Do they try to go straight to federal court and try to get this to the Supreme Court? Do they try to move through the state courts, which are typically rigged on behalf of Democrats in the state of New York?
Yeah, I mean, the normal process would be to go up to the Intermediate Court of Appeals in New York and then the Supreme Court of New York. So there's two levels of appeal there. We already have a hint from the fact that the campaign, the president rather, appealed the judge's failure to recuse himself, which he was statutorily required to do given the personal financial interest of an immediate family member. And the Court of Appeals let the case go forward under this judge. So that's not a good sign for the intermediate level Court of Appeals. And typically, you're only able to take a federal appeal after you've exhausted your state remedies at the highest court, which is not going to happen, in my opinion, as a lawyer before the election. There are other things you could take, extraordinary writs of habeas or such, but, until they've got him in custody, I don't think they're going to be looking at that. So, I think it's going to wend its way through the system. And eventually, if there's some honest judges along the way, this should get reversed on a dozen grounds. I think I saw reversible error on a daily basis following this trial. Mm-hmm. I think it makes him more popular, frankly, politically, putting back my political hat. But this is a shameful day for American history. And young people who are thinking about law school are going to look at this and say, do I want to be part of this system? And, so I think that's really degrading the rule of law and people's respect for law throughout the country, not just with respect to this case. Because if you're willing to weaponize the entire legal system to get a political candidate, then you can do anything. Everything else is below that in terms of level of magnitude of corruption.
Well, that's Harmeet Dhillon. She is a Dhillon Law Group. Harmeet, appreciate the time. Dark day for the country. Thanks for your insight on all of this.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.